Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rachel Silva, and I work for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. Thank you for coming, and welcome to the Sandwiching and History Tour of the O'Kelley House. First of all, before we go inside, I want to introduce and thank the Clements family for allowing us to tour their beautiful home today. Let's give them a round of applause. And y'all, you have no idea how lucky you are today. They went way above and beyond. They've got fried pies from Lindsay's. So you picked a good day to come to Sandwiching in History. But we have Ann, Austin, and Gary Clements up front. And I want to tell you that there are a lot. If you're an O'Kelley family member, please raise your hand. There's a big contingent of O'Kelley family here today, too. So anytime I make a mistake, they'll be sure to correct me, I'm sure. But now we're all going to kind of orderly go inside and split between the front two rooms for the talk. Now, I know everybody's in tight quarters, but just try to bear with me here. You're going to have to stay quiet or you won't be able to hear.
Yes, Mom.
Yes, okay. Okay, for any architects in the audience, I know there's at least one. Gary. But this tour is worth 1 hour of continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects, and you can see me or Patricia Blick after the tour if you're interested in that. The Columbus Owen O'Kelley House was built in 1919 and is located in the Argenta Historic District, which was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1993. Is this cutting out? Yes. Okay. That's not good. Hopefully that stops. I apologize. Just to mention right now, there is a laptop right here by me that has a lot of historic photographs and before and after pictures of the rehabilitation of the house on a loop. And then Nancy has already discovered the hand-drawn house plans up here for show and tell, but please be very careful with those. They're not to leave the table area right here. There is another laptop in the kitchen that has this same PowerPoint loop on it, so if you can't see this one, then at some point you can walk by and look at the one in the kitchen. And there is a computer upstairs, a desktop, that has the same loop on it, so if you can't get to one of these to look, you can find it around the house. But I'm going to give you some North Little Rock history and then talk about the family in this house. The city of North Little Rock was called Argenta in the early days of settlement. Thomas Willoughby Newton Sr. owned a large tract of farmland in this area, and he served as president of the Southwest and Arkansas Mining Company. Beginning in the late 1840s, Newton's mining company extracted silver and lead from the Kellogg mine, which is located about 10 miles north of Argenta. In 1866, Thomas Newton's son, Colonel Robert C. Newton, named the newly platted town Argenta because of the silver his father had mined at what they called Kellogg's Diggings, or the Kellogg mine, because Argentum is the Latin word for silver. Argenta thrived because of the railroad industry. The Memphis and Little Rock Railway was the first operating railroad in Arkansas, and it ran east and west from Memphis to Argenta. The Memphis and Little Rock crossed the Little Rock and Fort Smith Railway at 4th Street between Poplar and Magnolia, and the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Railroad ran along the path of what would be 11th Street, came around to the southwest, and then it crossed the Arkansas River at the Bering Cross Bridge. The Iron Mountain Railroad shops were west of Argenta in Bering Cross, where the current Union Pacific shops are today, and the Memphis and Little Rock had shops on the north side of 4th Street between Olive and Locust. So it stands to reason that many residents of Argenta were employed by the railroad in some capacity. Argenta was a rough town. It had no municipal government in the early days, and it was considered virtually lawless. In fact, the Arkansas Gazette often condemned Argenta, calling the town, quote, a deserving candidate for a shower of brimstone. Another Gazette article from November 25th of 1880 insisted that Argenta should, quote, be either incorporated or attached to Little Rock. Each train brings a number of tramps and disreputable characters to the place who should not be tolerated in any community. Gambling was also commonplace in Argenta, leading the Gazette to dub Argenta the crap shooting center of Arkansas. So Argenta residents recognized all these problems, and in 1890 they filed a petition to incorporate as a city of the first class. However, this attempt was quashed by Little Rock when it claimed Argenta as its 8th ward. Referencing a law that excluded the voters in a targeted annexation area, Little Rock laid a territorial claim on Argenta to increase its tax base. But Little Rock provided Argenta, then the 8th ward of Little Rock, with very few city services in return for their tax dollars. So a plot was hatched for Argenta to regain its independence. William C. Fawcett, who was a prominent businessman, 8th ward alderman, and the first mayor of North Little Rock, worked with state legislators to pass the Hoxie-Walnut Ridge Bill in 1903. And that would allow cities within 1 mile of each other to consolidate if the voters approved it at the polls. At a glance, the bill was written to allow the northeast Arkansas towns of Hoxie and Walnut Ridge to consolidate, which they later did, but it would also be applicable statewide. So the newly incorporated town of North Little Rock, which had incorporated in 1901 just north of the 8th ward, turned around in 1904 and annexed Argenta back from Little Rock. In 1906, North Little Rock changed its name back to Argenta, and it remained that way until 1917, when it was changed to North Little Rock at the urging of James P. Fawcett. And now about this part of the neighborhood. Prior to 1915, the western residential section of Argenta was largely undeveloped, and there was a reason for this. The Memphis and Little Rock Railroad came into Argenta from the east along 4th Street, and the tracks curved slightly to the northwest as they continued toward the Iron Mountain Railroad over here and the Bering Cross Bridge over the Arkansas River. So the Memphis and Little Rock tracks used to run diagonally through the 400 blocks of Main, Maple, and Orange Streets and came right through the intersection of 5th and Willow, right back here behind us down the street, and they continued northwest all the way over to the other railroad tracks. But the Rock Island Railroad Bridge, now the Clinton Bridge, everybody knows it is the Clinton Bridge now, was built in 1899, making it unnecessary for that railroad to come through the neighborhood. It could just cross over there to the east of Argenta. So this line coming through was abandoned. In 1905, the tracks were still here, and there were abandoned rail cars on the tracks, and they were offered to people in the area for firewood. So after the railroad tracks were removed, and presumably the railroad sold the property, residential development could occur in this part of town. And most of the homes on West 5th Street between Willow and Broadway were built in the 1920s in the Craftsman style of architecture. And this was predominantly a working class neighborhood, and the 400 block of West 5th, where we are right now, was home to a pharmacist, barber, doctor, and then lots of railroad employees. Now about the O'Kelley House. It was built in 1919 by Owen O'Kelley. Columbus Owen O'Kelley, and he went by Owen, was born August 31st, 1883 at Judsonia in White County, Arkansas. When he was in his early 20s, O'Kelley moved to North Little Rock, and on September 2nd, 1906, he married Grace Pearl Piles, who also grew up at Judsonia. Owen and Grace O'Kelley's first home in North Little Rock was located at 1510 Candler, or Chandler Street, spelled both ways, which was just north of the rail yard in Bering Cross. The house is no longer there. O'Kelley worked as a timekeeper and as a clerk for the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Railroad, and that later became Missouri Pacific in 1917. And the timekeeper's job was to schedule work crews and make sure everybody worked the appropriate number of hours. The O'Kelleys had 11 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood. And I'm going to run down the list. There's Bernadine, Iris, then Owen O'Kelley Jr., who died in infancy, Ralph, Kathleen, Carol, who was a male Carol, James Eugene, who died in infancy, Jacqueline, Ted, and Ned, who were twins, and Bobby, which is a female, Bobby, and she was blind. Their youngest child was blind. In January 1919, Owen O'Kelley purchased this lot, which is Lot 20, Block 5 in Fawcett's Addition, for $1,250. The warranty deed specified that any residence built on this lot must cost at least $1,500. But now, backtrack to 1908. Owen O'Kelley had just moved to North Little Rock a couple years before that, and he was working as a carpenter before he got his job with the railroad. In March of 1908, O'Kelley signed up for a correspondence course in building contractors, is what it was called, through the International Textbook Company. So fast forward back to 1919, he's still working for the railroad, but he had the knowledge to build the house. And that's exactly what he did. These are his hand-drawn plans for the house. There's one sheet for the first floor, one sheet for the second floor. And Owen O'Kelley designed and built this house in 1919. Owen O'Kelley worked for the Iron Mountain Railroad, or Missouri Pacific Railroad, for 18 years. In the early 1920s, O'Kelley also had a half interest in the Carroll O'Kelley Auto Garage at 800 West 3rd Street in North Little Rock. And there's a photograph, it's already passed on this loop, but there's a photograph of an old car in front of a big garage building. If you've seen it go by, Owen O'Kelley and Grace are both in that picture. But O'Kelley sold his interest in that company in November 1925 and started working as a salesman for the Wright Motor Company. And he was likely working for the railroad and the auto company at the same time. In the late 1920s, he stopped working for the railroad and he started working as a salesman for Phones Brothers Hardware Company in Little Rock. And by 1931, he was employed by Sears, Roebuck and Company, first as a salesman and later as the manager of their hardware department. In 1938, the O'Kelley family purchased a house at 411 Donaghy Street in Conway, and most of the family relocated to the Conway house so the older children could be closer to college. O'Kelley's youngest daughter, Bobby, was blind and continued to live on 5th Street in this house. And at that time, O'Kelley managed the hardware department at the Sears in Little Rock, so he lived here with Bobby on 5th Street during the week, and he would go to see his wife and other children on the weekends in Conway. In the late 1930s, O'Kelley converted the upstairs of the 413 West 5th house of this house into boarding rooms to provide a lifetime source of income for Bobby. From about 1940 until the early 1970s, the upstairs rooms were rented to boarders and they were later turned into apartments. The original upstairs floor plan had 5 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a sleeping porch across the back of the house. And O'Kelley converted it into 4 bedrooms, 2 kitchenettes, and 2 bathrooms. Bobby O'Kelley married Olin Brooks and had 2 children, Alan and Sherry Brooks, both of whom are here today. I think y'all are both out on the front porch. Yeah, okay. Bobby and her family lived in the 5th Street house and rented rooms. In 1947, Owen O'Kelley wrote his will, which established a life trust for his wife, Grace, and granted the 5th Street house to Bobby O'Kelley Brooks and her heirs. In 1950, Owen O'Kelley's eldest child, Bernadine O'Kelley Lennox, was named his legal guardian as he was at Baptist Hospital in a nursing home situation. Owen O'Kelley died on July 4th, 1951 at the age of 68. He was buried at Evergreen Cemetery in Judsonia. O'Kelley's widow, Grace, continued to live in Faulkner County. She died on May 24th, 1968 and is buried next to her husband in Judsonia. In 1952, Bobby O'Kelley assumed full ownership of this house. She continued to live in the house and rented out rooms. By the mid-1960s, Bobby had divorced and remarried. Her second husband, Harold Holmes, was a musician. By 1990, Bobby's son, Alan Brooks, assumed ownership of the property. The house had deteriorated considerably over the years and was condemned in 1990, and then a minor fire damaged the house in 91. Bobby O'Kelley Holmes died on August 4th, 1994. And 1 year later, in August 1995, Gary and Ann Clements bought the house for $5,500. Yes. So, keep in mind that the house was valued at $10,000 in 1950. 1950, it was worth 10,000 bucks. So the equivalent to that in $95 would have been $63,000, but they got it for $5,500. So that tells you what kind of shape the house was in structurally, and also what property values were like in Argenta in the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, Argenta was a neighborhood in transition. The O'Kelley house was in a severely deteriorated state and was missing its entire front porch. But Gary, an architect, and Ann, a historian, they saw the home's potential and they knew that it could be saved.
Mostly Gary.
Okay, mostly Gary. Gary might have had to twist her arm a little bit. And at first, they didn't know exactly what they were going to do with the house. Make it into Gary's studio or an office or make it rental property. But the Clements planned to stay in their historic home that they had already renovated in Park Hill in North Little Rock and work on this place as time allowed. However, they scrapped that plan when 18 months into the project Anne became pregnant. So they would soon need a bigger house, and this became it. So the project was kind of kicked into high gear at that point. First, there was the enormous task of cleaning up the yard and the house, both of which were full of trash. And you can see that on some of the before pictures here. Then the Clements did a lot of the interior demo work themselves in order to find the original floor plan, removing, newer walls that were put up in the house. And during this process, it was discovered that the home had extensive termite damage, making the couple rethink what would actually be salvageable from the original framing and structural components. And for this reason, the interior of the house was entirely rebuilt. This is basically a mid-1990s house in a 1919 shell. Uh-oh. The original floor plan was restored for the most part based on evidence discovered during the demolition of newer walls and on the original house plans. Wasn't that a nice find? I told you, they were hand-drawn by Owen O'Kelley, and the Clements found them in the attic. The original plan had 4 equal-sized rooms downstairs. So you see 1, 2, 3, and then this one has been changed a little bit with the bathroom and the hallway put into it. And then upstairs, 5 bedrooms, 1 bath, and the sleeping porch. And I mentioned that the front porch was missing when the Clements bought the house. And by the way, they didn't know exactly what it looked like. So at that time, Jacqueline O'Kelley Morgan, one of the O'Kelley kids, lived in Little Rock, and she periodically would drive by here to check on how things were going. And she decided to stop one day for a visit, and she later brought her brother Carol whenever he came from Texas, and Carol O'Kelley provided them with a 1926 photograph of the O'Kelley family on the front porch, and that's on here too. But it's a great picture of the family, and it shows the house, and it shows the porch, how it was. And so because of that, they were able to accurately reconstruct the front porch. And the Clements were able to restore all of the original wood windows, which is actually very impressive considering what kind of shape the house was in, and the side lights at the front door right here. The only new windows in the house are the windows across the old sleeping porch, which is now kind of a sunroom office. Those are all new. And the front door is new, but it was modeled after the side lights. The wood trim is all new. But you look around, you wouldn't be able to tell it. It was all milled to replicate the original trim, and it's all pine, just like it was originally. The wood floors are new, and they're all oak. The light fixtures, this one here and the one in the other room, they're both antiques, but they're not original to this house. The Clements moved into the house in September 1997, and the major interior work was completed in November of 97, and Austin Clements was born in December 1997. In 1998, the O'Kelley Clements house became a contributing property in the Argenta Historic District, meaning it was listed on the National Register. Also in 1998, the North Little Rock Times published an article about Gary and Ann and the restoration of the house, which resulted in phone calls from people who stayed here as early as the 1940s as boarders in the house. And one of those people was a woman named Minnie Moon. And she lived in the O'Kelley house during World War II with her sister, Jewel Larson, and her aunt and uncle, Jewel and Bill Corbett. In 1946, Minnie Lee Kinchin married Glenn Moon in front of the fireplace in the O'Kelley house. And you say, where's the fireplace? It's not here anymore. It was right over there on this wall. Okay? But she had a picture, a photograph of, she and her husband and the preacher and then a couple they were friends with standing right here in the front parlor in front of the fireplace where they were married. And then the other cool thing about Minnie Moon is that she was a poet. And whenever she lived here in the 40s, she wrote a poem about this house. And it actually was published in 2000 by the International Poetry Society. And I'll read you her poem. It's called Old House. I know a house all worn and old and weather-beaten with years. A house whose childhood laughter has mingled with grown-up tears. It is a house where girlhood secrets still tiptoe on the stair, A house where boys turned men have left their scuff marks here and there. A comfortable house whose broad roofs shelter the people who came there and go. A house whose wise old walls still echo with whispers of long ago. I love a house where ivy and cedar have made of themselves a part. I love a house grown old with memories, a house with a mellow heart. And some other details you'll see whenever you're looking around. There's a workshop out in the backyard that was built in 2000 on the site of the original outbuilding. 2002, they completed the screened back porch, which is downstairs below the old sleeping porch. And in 2010, the attic was converted into Austin's hangout. So the attic is finished out now too.
Man run.
Yeah, the man cave, right? Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments now while we're all together and we can hear pretty well?
I would tell you that Glenn Moon was a photographer at the old Arkansas Democrat.
Yes, you are correct. Did everybody hear her?
I worked there from 66 to 76, and he had been there for a long time and was there at that time.
Yes, she said that Glenn Moon, who I talked about marrying Minnie Moon right here in the house, was a photographer with the Arkansas Democrat. And that's true, and we've talked about that. Anything else? Any O'Kelley family members have anything to add?
I think you know more of the history than
I doubt that.
It's very interesting.
Thank
we
you.
have pictures of all of it from way back.
Well, great.
Our history, which we're glad isn't in your part.
Was there a
Okay.
bathroom down here? Right there?
Originally?
Yeah, originally.
No.
So that
No.
room-
It was just four. He asked if there was a bathroom downstairs originally. No, there was just one upstairs. These were just four equal-sized rooms. It's an American four-square house. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for being. Oh, Joe, do you have one?
Would contribute this. Our family moved here during World War II in the 40s and 50s here in North Little Rock. You were assumed to work for the railroad unless you told somebody otherwise.
Did everybody hear that? He said that his family moved here in the 40s and 50s, and that it was assumed that you worked for the railroad unless you told them otherwise.
I never heard that until years later.
I never heard that.
Okay.
My father was
Well, you all make sure to get a fried pie. They're back in the back dining room, which is the back room on this floor. And you can go upstairs and look around. You can go out in the backyard and look around. And our next tour is Friday, June the 6th at the Barney Elias House at 335 Goshen in North Little Rock, up in Park Hill. All right. Anything? Yep.
Drinks on the back porch.
Drinks on the back porch.
Oh, yeah,
All right.
I have one more thing.
Yep, one more thing. Hang on.
I had a memory sitting out there, and I can remember my mother Bobby talking about as a little girl.
Hey, y'all.
Grandmother O'Kelley would sit out there, and the hobos, the bums, would get off the trains and come to the back door, and Grandmother would feed them leftover biscuits and oatmeal if they wanted to sit down and listen to her read the Bible. If they sat down and listened to the Bible while they ate, she told them they didn't need anything, and she sent them on down the road. Mother always was afraid somebody was going to cut her throat for her, but she continued to witness to these people that came from the train yards. So.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. You can look around.